Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a seriously fascinating piece of geopolitical history, and we're going to transform it into a gripping story of, well, total transformation. We're looking at a region that literally sat completely outside the currents of global trade for over 1,000 years. And then, they suddenly seized control of the modern world's absolute most critical resource.
So how exactly did an isolated stretch of desert execute the greatest transfer of wealth in human history? We're exploring how a vulnerable, geographically isolated region went from extreme poverty and sparse nomadic living to pulling off this massive shift in just a single generation. It's a total masterclass in leverage, timing, and global economics, and it honestly shaped the very world we live in today. Let's get into it.
Part 1. Before the oil, isolation and survival.
Okay, so for most of its history, the Arabian Peninsula was entirely cut off from the global economy. I mean, punishing geography, searing heat, and endless dunes meant that while these massive empires rose and fell in neighboring places like Mesopotamia and Egypt, the Gulf kind of just drifted in a time warp. This extreme isolation incubated a really unique society of nomadic tribes governed by hereditary rule. And when foreign powers like the British and Ottoman empires finally did show up, they kept their distance. They preferred to simply back the existing local rulers just to maintain a buffer zone, rather than actually trying to colonize that harsh terrain directly. The reality of Bedouin life prior to the 1930s was just incredibly sparse. As the British explorer Wilfred Thesiger noted, to arrange 3 stones as a fireplace was the only architecture that many of them required. 3 stones. That was all they needed to survive in this brutal environment. It really highlights the stark, almost unbelievable contrast to the explosive, rapid modernization that was waiting right around the corner.
Now, the absolute crucial point to understanding Gulf politics, both back then and today, is this concept of the rentier state. Basically, this is a state where political power is based on distributing unearned economic rent from a quote-unquote gift of nature, rather than from taxing citizens. Even before oil, local rulers survived by securing these rents, unearned income from things like foreign treaties, port fees, or pilgrimage tolls. They'd distribute those funds to their subjects to buy support and maintain stability. It established a deeply ingrained patronage system. So when oil was eventually discovered, those massive new revenues, they just seamlessly plugged right into this pre-existing political structure.
Part 2. The Black Gold Rush, the arrival of the Americans. Driven by a surging global demand for gasoline, the sudden arrival of Americans in the 1930s profoundly shocked the locals. I mean, imagine living an untouched, nomadic lifestyle for generations, and suddenly foreigners with massive industrial drills just appear out of nowhere, entirely upending the social order. But local rulers told their people to embrace it. Just like the fictionalized emir in Abdulrahman Munif's novel said, "Under our feet, there are oceans of oil, oceans of gold. Our friends have come to extract the oil."
You have to hear this to believe it. The sheer disparity in these early deals is absolutely staggering. Since the host nations lacked the capital and expertise to extract the oil themselves, they just signed away the rights. Western companies, like Standard Oil of California, secured absolute monopolies on what would turn out to be trillions of dollars in resources for, well, absolute pennies. Take the 1933 Saudi concession, for example. They gave away a 60-year lock on an estimated $1 trillion resource for just $775,000 in gold bullion.
So why was the Gulf the perfect oil incubator? Well, the geography, geology, and governance made this region an absolutely perfect setting for the Seven Sisters, those massive Western oil monopolies of the era, to just print money. Think about it. Autocratic governance meant dealing with just one ruler. The state owned all the mineral rights, so there were no messy private landowners to pay off. And the oil itself? It was shallow, heavily pressurized, and right near the coast. To put that into perspective, while an average U.S. well at the time produced just 19 barrels a day, an average Gulf well was blasting out 6,000 barrels a day. That is a massive difference.
But, friction was inevitable. The Western companies were so addicted to extracting cheap oil for the industrialized world that they viewed the natural gas coming out of the ground as a mere nuisance. Actually, worse than a nuisance. They just flared it off, literally burned it right into the atmosphere. This is wild. In the 1970s, Saudi Arabia's greenhouse gas emissions were actually higher than they were in 2010 because Western companies simply burned off all that gas. And this happened despite the host nations desperately wanting to capture that very gas to generate electricity and fuel their own national development.
Part 3. An obsolescing bargain, the friction builds.
Okay, so the West quickly became entirely addicted to cheap Middle Eastern oil. But the Gulf nations, they slowly began to realize they had kind of given away the store. The whole dynamic shifted because of this fascinating economic concept known as the obsolescing bargain. Basically, this is the shift in leverage from foreign investors back to host governments once fixed infrastructure is built on sovereign territory. See, initially, host countries had to offer massive incentives to lure foreign investors in to take a risk and drill. But once billions of dollars of pipelines, rigs, and ports were permanently built on their land, well, they couldn't exactly be packed up and moved, right? Practically overnight, the host countries suddenly found themselves holding all the leverage.
And so began the creep of nationalization. Using the implicit threat of total expropriation, which was a terrifying precedent set by Mexico way back in 1938, producer countries slowly began squeezing the international oil companies for a fairer share of the wealth. In 1950, Saudi Arabia successfully demanded a 50-50 revenue split. Then by 1969, Libya pushed the envelope even further, demanding 55% and an increase in posted oil prices. And the oil companies, utterly terrified of losing their physical assets entirely, they just kept conceding.
Part 4. The 1973 Oil Shock. The Climax. Tensions finally boiled over when geopolitical anger met this newfound economic leverage. By 1972, Venezuela, Algeria, and Libya had already grabbed controlling shares of their oil. But the true climax hit in October 1973. The Arab-Israeli war broke out, and the U.S. resupplied Israel. Triggered by this military support, Saudi King Faisal and the Arab OPEC states finally unsheathed what they called the oil weapon. In late 1973, they launched an embargo, slashed production, and completely halted oil shipments to the United States.
$12. The embargo caused absolute global panic, effectively quadrupling the price of a barrel of oil from $3 to $12 by 1974. The free world, which had built its entire post-war economic boom on the assumption of endless, cheap energy, was suddenly brought to a grinding halt.
Part 5. The ultimate power shift. The New World Order.
This massive price shock acted as the final catalyst for the host nations to reclaim absolutely everything. We're talking a total domino effect of Gulf takeovers. Riding this immense wave of sky-high prices, Gulf nations aggressively finalized their moves. In 1974, Kuwait and Qatar seized 60% of Western concessions. The very next year, 1975, Kuwait just takes the remaining 40% for a paltry $50 million. And by 1980, Saudi Arabia achieved full 100% ownership of Aramco. They permanently shifted control from Western corporations to their own state-owned national oil companies. The era of the Western Seven Sisters dictating global supply, it was officially over.
40 times. The financial impact of this shift was absolutely staggering. Saudi Arabia's oil revenues surged 40-fold in just a single decade. They ballooned from $655 million to nearly $27 billion. The sheer volume of capital flowing into these once isolated nations was quite literally unprecedented in human history. And the economic data perfectly illustrates this massive wealth transfer. When we track the GDP per capita of places like Qatar and the United Arab Emirates from 1965 to 2015, we see it didn't just grow. It eventually skyrocketed past even the United States. It's a striking testament to how completely the geopolitical and economic center of gravity had shifted across the globe.
As Arthur Ross observed back in 1980, never in recent history has there been a transfer of wealth and power on the scale and at the velocity that is now being witnessed. He hit the nail on the head. In a single generation, an isolated, impoverished desert capitalized on the global economy's deep addiction to oil. They used brilliant timing and incredible leverage to become the absolute geostrategic center of the modern world, completely rewriting the rules of global power.
So I'll leave you with this final thought to take away from our explainer today. If the 20th century was defined by the world's addiction to Gulf oil, who holds the leverage in the 21st century energy transition? As the world attempts to shift away from oil and navigate a whole new energy landscape, who's going to control the vital resources next? Who will hold those levers of power? Something to think about. Thanks for learning with me today.